Hello, I'm Simon K. Jones, and you're listening to the audio version of my newsletter, Write More with Simon K. Jones. Today's is called How to Build an Online Community. And one way or another, I've been building online communities for about 25 years, in and out of the day job. The biggest and most unexpected benefit of writing this newsletter is the community that has formed around it. It's not something I planned, and I'm still slightly startled that it happened at all. I thought it would be useful to dig into that a bit, especially for anyone out there who is starting out on a similar road and would like to develop a group of lovely people around what you're writing. Is anybody out there? There was a specific moment I realised something special was happening. I know the date, February 23rd, 2022. That was the day I sent out a newsletter called What Are You Writing Right Now? I was poised to delete it. My finger was hovering over the button, so convinced was I that it was going to bomb. My expectation was that I'd send it out and in return get an awkward silence. At that point in time I had 481 subscribers, which seemed like an enormous number, but was also very early days. I'd had interesting chats and comments in response to some of my essays, but I'd never dared to hand the baton over completely to the readers. It felt like leaping off a cliff. Was this the moment I'd embarrass myself and my nascent newsletter experiment would be pointed and laughed at? Before the end of the day, the comments started coming. It ended up being over 40 comments in 4 days, including some responses from me. I was thrilled. I'd kept the tumbleweeds at bay. And it wasn't a one-off either. Each time I've sent out a discussion thread, it's prompted interesting responses. Over time, it's become more self-sustaining, with you lovely readers and or listeners talking to each other and not just to me. Some discussions have had over 100 comments. And bear in mind, I don't tend to write stuff that's really controversial, so it's not the kind of thing that gathers people into a frenzy who have to comment. So, the thing to remember about newsletter numbers is that it isn't really about the raw numbers, but the depth and quality. It's absolutely a two-way thing. I learn all sorts from the people participating in each discussion. And even after the discussion is no longer active, once people have moved on to the next thing, those conversations remain as a record that other people can dig into in the future and continue to learn from. So, tip number 1, go niche. There are 2 ways to go with a community. You can go as broad as possible in order to attract as many people as possible. And this is where the social platforms have gone in the last decade. They just want everyone. Twitter/X and Facebook only make sense and are only useful if everyone is there. Because that's the promise that you'll always be able to connect with your mum, your colleague, friend, hairdresser, etc. That's also why some of the sort of startups that have come along since have always struggled, because they don't have everyone yet. Of course, having everyone also happens to be the way to attract a wide variety of advertisers. The downside is that nobody really cares. Facebook isn't a community, it's a platform. There are communities within Facebook which benefit from the massive scale of the parent, but there's no real allegiance to the underlying system. In fact, people put up with it rather than actually enjoy it. The alternative is to go narrow. Find a niche that interests you and go for that. There will be far fewer people to theoretically join such a community, but the ones that do will be really into it. And that's what happens with newsletters, like my one. When I started it, I wasn't sure what the angle would be, as writing, which is what I wanted to write about, but that's about as broad as it gets, and there's already a billion resources for that. I ended up going down 2 particular avenues: serial fiction, which is my particular passion for what I do, and also leaning into the idea of writing more, or at all, rather than writing well. Everyone who considers subscribing to my newsletter knows what they're getting, and anyone not interested in that will know that ahead of time, which creates a useful bit of self-selection. No one's going to be wasting anybody else's time. The readers who are here, hello to you, are here because we are interested in the same things. And if you don't have the scale and the resources of Meta, and I doubt Zuck is reading this or listening to this, niche is the way to go. Narrow and deep, not wide and shallow. Tip 2. Invite debate. This seems obvious, but it's easy to overlook. Make sure you invite people to talk. Thing is, most people are lurkers. They read and thoroughly appreciate what you're putting out, but leaving comments isn't their vibe, which is, of course, completely fine. Most people read books, watch movies, play games, etc., without feeling an urge to contribute to the discourse. In fact, I'd say there are three kind of clear types of reader. Number one is the lurker. They read, they really enjoy your work, but you will never hear directly from them. Number two is the commenter. As long as you invite them in and remind them that discussion is welcome, these people will show up and leave their thoughts. And number three is the contributor. These are the most engaged, and they will always like, comment, share, and so on without needing an invite. They have opinions and will share them, and also have the potential to be your biggest fans and supporters. A rare find, though. So none of those are fixed positions. A lurker can become a commenter can become a contributor. But everyone starts somewhere, and that's about making it clear that you, the writer, wants that conversation. That's why you need to have little calls to action, like having a leave a comment button in your articles. It's why you need to make the point within your copy. Put in things like, what does community mean to you? Leave a comment. Someone else's newsletter is their domain, and it can be intimidating to raise your head above the parapet and put your own voice into that space. So if you want comments and discussion, you have to roll out the welcome mat. Tip 3. Set the tone. Something I've observed from establishing and managing communities over the years is that it's critical to be active and set the tone from the off. If you create the space and just leave it to its own devices, it will evolve into its own beast, which may or may not be what you had in mind. It means wading in yourself. Want an irreverent comments section full of acerbic wit? Well, you've got to demonstrate that first. Want a serious intellectual debate space? That's only going to happen if you show readers what you mean. Want a relaxed, friendly space that's casual and tolerant of everyone? That's up to you to demonstrate that. As the writer, your writing and comments set the tone for the entire ecosystem. The style and content of your newsletters are guides to what you expect. If a newsletter is a rageful political commentary on the US election, that's going to attract a particular type of community. If you write a nostalgic newsletter that covers 1980s toys, that'll be very different. If you're an academic re-examining historical events, you're going to appeal to a specific cohort of readers. I make a point in my newsletter of sticking to a few principles that I think kind of lay the groundwork. Number one, I always stay positive, while strenuously trying to avoid tipping into life coach guru territory, which nobody wants. Number two, I never go negative. You won't read something from me that is tearing into someone else. I'm not interested in doing that. Number three, I keep it light. I'm very keen on silly dad jokes, even when discussing something complex. Especially then, in fact. Number four, I don't often stray from the point of the newsletter. You won't find me writing extensively about politics, for example. Like, no one's here for that, and neither am I. I'm very interested in politics, I'm heavily engaged, but not in the context of this newsletter. Number five, I have zero tolerance for discrimination, hate speech, and general nastiness towards other people. So I don't have that as a manifesto pinned up anywhere. But most of it should be self-evident in the newsletter itself and the way I conduct myself down in the comments. That's what I mean about setting the tone. You demonstrate it in every sentence you put into the newsletter and every comment you leave on your own newsletter and anyone else's. As soon as you walk in the room, you're setting that tone. There's another quirk to consider here in how you provide access. Most newsletter platforms have options for how comments work and whether they're accessible to everyone or only paid subscribers. This will have an impact, inevitably, on the atmosphere and type of discourse, and is very contextual to each writer. But if you don't set the tone and just leave a space to develop by itself, there can be unpredictable consequences. Perhaps people show up that you weren't expecting. Maybe the tone of discussion veers off in an uncomfortable direction. And once that happens, it can be very difficult to bring it back on track. Tip 4. Do provocations. Guidance is also needed when it comes to what is being discussed. What do you want people to talk about? Don't just leave it to chance. And this is where you can work questions and provocations into your writing. Invite commentary or feedback or alternative ideas. If you've written about a thorny or controversial topic, invite counterpoints. You can do this even more overtly by sending out a newsletter that is explicitly about that exchange of ideas. I particularly enjoyed the responses when I sent out one called Fictional Maps, Yes or No. I didn't expect the responses to be quite so vociferous and varied, but it was all fascinating stuff. Questions don't always have to be intellectual or debate-centric. You can invite people to just talk about themselves, because that's something we all like doing. For example, I sent something out in 2023, which was simply, what's your current project? And everyone was very happy to chat about what they were working on. The questions you pose also contribute to that tone that I was talking about earlier. The subject matter and phrasing will influence the comments and the sorts of people you get contributing. Just by inviting counterpoints, for example, you're establishing that you welcome them, that you're open to different points of view, and that can kind of defuse what might otherwise be an aggressive situation, because people are like, oh, this person's willing to listen, let's have a conversation, instead of just shouting at each other from across the room. Tip 5. Engage and respond. Being present in your own community is essential to some of the points I've already made, but it's worth focusing on this specifically. A newsletter-based community is an exchange between writer and reader. It's an opportunity for conversation. If you invite comments and pose questions but never complete that feedback loop, your readers will feel like they're just speaking into the void, or maybe you're just using the comments as a marketing exercise. This doesn't mean you have to immediately respond, or sit at your keyboard anxiously jumping on every comment. That can be just as unnerving to a reader as no response at all. I tend to let comments run for half a day or so before getting overly involved. That gives everyone a chance to say their piece before I start diving in with replies. Go in too early and you can short-circuit the discussion. The author being present can be kind of intimidating, depending on the context. This is also an opportunity to re-establish the tone that you're going for. You can steer discussions back on track if needed. If someone has strongly disagreed with you, it's a chance for you to reply in a way that furthers the discussion rather than creating rancor. This sounds like a lot of work. Yes, it does. And you don't have to go down this route. It's very easy to turn comments off if you're not interested in nurturing your own community. I actively enjoy meeting and interacting with readers, so it's absolutely part of what motivates me to write the newsletter in the first place. On top of that, though, vibrant discussions help to bind everyone together, and it's a way for readers to meet each other. I've seen discussions that have been self-sustaining, with readers talking to each other without me needing to take part. If you deepen those connections through inviting debate and creating those two-way conversations, you foster a situation in which readers are more likely to subscribe and to help spread the word and be advocates for what you're doing. If people know that I exist and am present, they're more likely to recommend this newsletter to other people. It's a very virtuous circle. Thanks for listening. You can find some more stuff over on the newsletter, as always, at simonkjones.substack.com. And of course, given today's topic, if you head over there, you can indeed leave a comment. Thanks again.